Mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. You've definitely heard these words and slogans like adaptation, justice now. But what do these terms actually mean and where do they come from? In the 90s, as scientific research began to highlight the link between human activity and the rise of greenhouse gas emissions because of the burning of fossil fuels, the term mitigation gained traction. It focuses on the root cause of the problem, the emissions heating up the planet. Think of it like this. If you're cooking and your skillet catches fire, do you turn the stove up or off? That's mitigation. It's reducing or preventing the emissions at the source. The first COPs were focused primarily on mitigation. How do we stop emitting the greenhouse gases warming up the planet? And Annex 1 countries, the countries of the global north, were supposed to cut their emissions first under the Kyoto Protocol. But then the term adaptation came. What happens when we start feeling the impacts of the climate crisis? When sea levels start to rise, when we have more frequent and stronger hurricanes, when we have droughts, that is when adaptation comes in. Our communities actually need to change, to shift. Our culture needs to change and shift to be able to stand this rise of climate impacts and climate disasters. The Paris Agreement represented a global shift towards adaptation, making all parties responsible for taking action with the goal of keeping warming well below 2 degrees and with a goal of 1.5. It mixes adaptation and mitigation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to stay below 1.5 degrees, but prepare for a world of up to 2 degrees of warming. Finally, we have loss and damage, because what happens when the climate crisis actually arrives and the disasters start to plague our communities? The countries least responsible for the crisis are sometimes the ones that suffer the most. However, when climate impacts started to come to our communities, we realized that the increase in temperature was going to need us to prepare for these changes. Loss and damage is something that we talk about when we actually already see the impacts of climate disasters. When the flood comes, when the fires come, how do our communities rebuild and build back better and build back in a way that is more resilient? That is the core of loss and damage. And something really important to address here is that there's losses and damages that are beyond material things. What sometimes in indigenous people's communities we call the loss and damage of our tradition and our knowledge, because we're losing those two as the planet heats up. And that is a right that we have to conserve under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So you can see that they're all interconnected. When we turn down the emissions, when we close the tap, we are doing mitigation. When we are making sure that our cities, our communities are more resilient to climate impacts, we are doing adaptation. And when we have the resources to rebuild our communities, that is addressing loss and damage, which needs to be done through the Loss and Damage Fund. And all of it ties directly to fossil fuels and the fossil fuel industry, the grip that the fossil fuel industry has had on our energy systems and our economy, and to be honest, our governments and the private sector. So making sure that we are regulating the fossil fuel industry, that we're transitioning away from fossil fuels, that we have a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty is the basis of addressing mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage.